Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, and thank you to Lois for reaching out and asking me to speak to you guys today. I am happy to report that my kids are now old enough to put themselves to bed, so I'm free to speak for hours if you like. And as I'm sure Lois and Donna could tell you, I love all things birds and all things Newfoundland, so I could very easily speak for a long time, but I'm going to try and keep my presentation to about 45 minutes. I hope that's okay. And then there'll be some time for chats and questions afterwards for anybody who'd like to do that. So yeah, so what I really want to do is just give you a little bit of an overview of where I live and the birds of where I live. So before we get into that, just make sure I can change my slides here. A little bit about me. So I grew up in Newfoundland. I grew up on the northeast coast of the island. And I was always a nature lover. I was one of those kids who was always out exploring in the woods. I was lucky. I grew up in a fairly rural area where that was something I could still do as a kid. Lots of exploring, lots of time in the woods with my grandfathers, as Lois mentioned in the introduction. But it wasn't really until I sort of started university that I really discovered birding. I was working with the Conservation Corps doing nature-based community programming, and through some of the training programs that we had, I met a park interpreter who took us on a bird walk, and he just opened my eyes to the diversity of birds that was around me. I guess I always knew birds were there, but I just didn't realize how many different kinds, and I was hooked immediately. So I soon took up birding and was out every day looking for birds, and then I discovered there was a whole community of people that did it. So birding sort of, as I'm sure most of you understand, it went from being a pastime to a lifestyle very quickly for me, and it has been ever since. And these days, I run a small bird tour business, Bird the Rock. As Lois mentioned, the Rock is sort of the a nickname that a lot of Newfoundlanders have for our province of Newfoundland, it being an island, a rocky island in the middle of the sea. Um, and so I run bird and nature tours all across Newfoundland throughout the year. And I also am fortunate when it's not so busy here in Newfoundland, I get to work with a couple of bird and tour companies and lead tours in other places like Trinidad and Tobago, where I'll be heading in a few weeks, um, Belize, Guatemala, other parts of Canada, Mexico occasionally. So it's a great opportunity to be able to travel and explore and do what I love doing as my job. So I feel like I'm one of the luckiest people in the world to be able to do that. But what we want to talk about today is Newfoundland and Labrador. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our province, we're the easternmost province in Canada. So right off at the very eastern edge of North America. The province has an island portion, which is Newfoundland, and a mainland portion, which is Labrador, which is connected to Quebec. Um, the island itself is about 42,000 square miles, so it's the 16th largest island in the world, a much larger island than most people think it will be before they come visit. And Labrador itself is quite a bit larger as well, but much of it is very difficult to access. And we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation. But for the most part, I'm going to talk more or less about the island portion because that's the area that most people tend to come and visit when they do come visit Newfoundland and Labrador. So for folks who've never been here, I know Lois and Donna have both been here. I'm not sure if anybody else has had the pleasure of visiting Newfoundland before. Not necessarily the easiest place to get to, but we do have four commercial airports, all of which have connections to other hubs in other parts of Canada and sometimes direct flights from Europe and the United States. So it's not that difficult to get here. Um, we have airports in our capital city, which you can see here with the star, St. John's, on the very eastern edge of the island, as well as in Gander, Deer Lake, and Happy Valley Goose Bay. And there are also ferry connections. So there are ferries that run from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland year round, as well as a seasonal one that runs in the summer, which lands a little bit closer to St. John's and is quite a bit more convenient for a lot of the tourists that come visit during that time of year. And there's also a ferry that runs between the island of Newfoundland and the Labrador portion of the province as well. So Newfoundland has been a popular tourist destination for quite a long time. It's continually getting more and more popular with visitors, especially in the years since COVID, when I think a lot of people have sort of turned to the idea of traveling to places that are a little more off the beaten path, don't tend to be crowded, lots of opportunities to get out in nature. So Newfoundland has only become more popular in the last 5 years, to be honest. And it's popular for a lot of reasons. We have some incredible nature here, lots of amazing whale watching, some great birding, as we're going to talk about, lots of great wildlife, some absolutely spectacular scenery, and lots of other activities that a lot of folks like to take in, like sports fishing. We have some great salmon rivers, char in the island, and lots of great cultural activities. We have some really rich history here, lots of great local folk music, those kinds of things, which a lot of people tend to come and visit for. But it's also been increasingly, for the last number of years, becoming a fantastic birding destination. So it's been really growing in popularity with visiting birders, especially from other parts of Canada and the United States. All those people who are keeping their ABA or their North American bird list and see the opportunity to come to a far-flung part of the continent and add some birds to their lists. So the province has a real array of different habitats, and of course, the more habitats you have, the more different bird life you have. So we have a very great diversity of bird life, and quite a few of some of the species that are otherwise kind of tough to see in North America. Things like the boreal breeding species and things like that. So it's a bit of an allure to a lot of birders to come visit Newfoundland and see some of these incredible things. So our location at the very northeast edge of Canada means that we get a real mix of birds and a never-ending variety, because the seasons, boy, do they ever change here. And as the seasons change, the birds, of course, are always changing. So it can be a really different place each month of the year. Whenever you decide to come visit, there's always a lot of different kinds of birds that you can expect to see. So for the most part, I'm going to focus on spring and summer. That's when most visitors come to Newfoundland. Nobody really comes here for the weather, I can promise you that. So most people do tend to come in spring and summer when our weather's the nicest. So we're going to talk a little bit about the birds that sort of that you might expect to find here in Newfoundland and Labrador from basically May to August. And you can't talk about Newfoundland and birds without talking about seabirds. They really are the sort of the iconic birds of Newfoundland and Labrador. They're sort of the stars of the show in lots of ways. And we're very fortunate here. Newfoundland and Labrador is home to some of the world's most spectacular seabird colonies. And more importantly, a lot of those seabird colonies are very accessible. And that's what a lot of places like Iceland and even Scotland and some other places that have big seabird colonies can't really boast is that they're not as accessible, whereas the colonies here in Newfoundland and Labrador are by and far quite accessible, which is it's one of the most important things when you think about it from a visiting perspective. So some days you can see more than a dozen of some of the most sought after seabird species in just a couple of hours, and Lois and Donna can attest to that. We saw a couple of the most spectacular seabird colonies while they visited here. So all kinds of species, including the ox, from puffins to razorbills, and shearwaters to kittiwakes, and of course the gannet. So we're going to talk about some of those just in a little more detail. And I have to sort of start off by talking about the Atlantic puffin. It is our provincial bird. It's one of the probably one of the most the symbols of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's used in a lot of our tourism ads, and it is officially our provincial bird, and for good reason. North America's largest colony of Atlantic puffins is located in the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, which is just 30 minutes from St. John's, so from our capital city. It's a 30-minute drive and a very short boat ride out, and you are suddenly in the midst of the world's second largest and North America's largest Atlantic puffin colony, where there are just thousands and thousands and thousands of birds all around you. It can be quite overwhelming, as well, in fact. And there are a number of commercial boat tours that operate out of a couple of communities on that little stretch of coast. So you have your pick of a couple of different boat tours that you can jump on, and 20 minutes from the dock, and you're really in what feels like a National Geographic TV special. You keep expecting David Attenborough's voice to come out of nowhere as you're sailing past these islands. And these boat tours are quite fantastic. You do get very close to the puffins. You can't get off the boat. The islands are protected, as you would expect. It is an ecological reserve, so there's no getting off of the boat. But as you can see from the picture here in the bottom, the boat actually gets very close to land. The birds are all very used to seeing these boats come by several times a day. So you can get some very close and intimate looks at these birds, even though you're on a boat, which is pretty spectacular. And in lots of cases, you're eye to eye with these birds, as you're especially if you're on one of the larger double decker boats, like you can see in this photo. So some really exceptional experiences and close encounters with the puffins by visiting the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve just outside of St. John's. And as I mentioned, it is North America's largest puffin colony. But just to put a number on that, there are more than 250,000 breeding pairs, so more than a half a million adult puffins at that colony throughout the summer. So it is quite spectacular to see tens and tens of thousands of puffins in just a few minutes' time, really. And for those of you who don't like to get on a boat, or you tend to be vulnerable to getting seasick, or if you're somebody who really enjoys bird photography and would like to have longer, less movement on a boat, and longer time to photograph the birds. There are a couple of other colonies around the island where you don't need to get on a boat. One of those is in Elliston on the Bonavista Peninsula, so again, about 3 hours from St. John's, where you can walk up to a colony that's just a stone's throw away from land, and you can sit there, and oftentimes the puffins will fly to you and walk around within 10 or 15 feet of you. The photographers love it there. It's a great place to go and see puffins if you don't like getting on a boat. You won't see the huge numbers. You're going to see maybe a couple of thousand puffins as opposed to 200,000 puffins. But you can get some really great intimate experiences with the puffins, and it's a fantastic place for bird photography. So there are a number of places that you can see puffins, with the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve having the biggest number. But there are 4 million other reasons to go and visit the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, because that half a million puffins that are there, they're actually a minority. The Witless Bay Ecological Reserve is made up of 4 islands, and those 4 islands during the summer are home to 4.5 million breeding seabirds for several months during the summer. So those seabirds include things like common murre, thick-billed murre, which is the southernmost breeding thick-billed murres in the world, breed there. So it's one of the most accessible and easiest places to see this Arctic breeding seabird. Lots and lots of razorbills. And you can see here just some of the sheer number of the birds in the sky flying off just one small section of one of the islands that we visit regularly. Black-legged kittiwakes, northern fulmars, great blackback gulls, herring gulls, all breeding on these islands, black guillemots. And also, you can see in the picture here the bird that's being held in someone's hand. This is a Leach's storm petrel. So the islands are also home to one of the largest Leach's storm petrel colonies in the world. But they tend to come under cover of darkness. So you almost never, very, very rarely do you actually see these birds around the island, because they only come to the nesting colony under cover of darkness, and during the daylight hours they're way, way out to sea. So even though there are more than 1 million of them breeding on one of the islands alone, we almost never see them, but they are there, and it is an incredible place. And on some days you do get lucky enough to see a few. And sometimes there are other reasons to visit the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve. It is one of the best whale watching places in the North Atlantic. There are times that I've seen upwards of 50 humpback whales on a single boat tour. out to see the puffins. So obviously the whale watching is a big part of it. The boats sort of do double duty. They always go visit the puffins and the seabirds, but they also spend quite a bit of time whale watching during the right season. So lots and lots of humpback whales. We get minke whale, fin whale, occasional orcas. Occasionally another whale will come by. Later in the season, we tend to get white-beaked and white-sided dolphins in the reserve. And if you're really lucky, if it's a good year, sometimes earlier in the spring, there are icebergs around. So there are always lots and lots of great reasons to jump on a boat and go exploring in Newfoundland, with the puffins and the seabirds just being one of those reasons. Well, there's another really great seabird that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the northern gannet. I think it's probably one of the most beautiful birds out there. They're very majestic with their sort of heads of faded gold, absolutely beautiful, and they're 6 foot wingspans, just beautiful, elegant seabirds. They do not breed in the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, so we sometimes see them on the boat tours as they're in the area, flying around, fishing in lots of opportunities. But in order to see them breeding, we drive about 2 hours from the capital of St. John's, to the southeast corner of the Avalon Peninsula, where you can see on the map, there in the bottom of the slide. And the Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve is home to one of the continent's largest and most accessible colonies of northern gannets. So there was, before the bird flu hit, there were about 16,500 breeding pairs, so 33,000 birds breeding at this colony. Unfortunately, the bird flu took a huge impact in 2022 on that colony, and we lost close to half of that breeding population. But now, just 3 years later, we've seen a huge recovery already. They're back to more than to about 3/4 of that population, and it's continuing to recover, thank God. So it can be quite spectacular. And the birds are just a part of it, because the scenery there on a clear day, it's one of the most spectacular places you can imagine as you're hiking over this beautiful tundra that sort of stretches across these towering sea cliffs. And it's just this beautiful landscape to go hiking over. And you walk for about 20 minutes, and all of a sudden you come face to face, and I mean face to face. You're just a rock's throw from 30,000 of these absolutely beautiful breeding seabirds. So absolutely stunning. It is a really gorgeous place to see. As you can see here from this panorama, it really is a spectacular vista that includes the gannets, and it is a beautiful landscape to visit, no matter what time of year it is. But during the summer, from about April until October, actually, there are gannets there, so they have a much longer season than many of the other seabirds. And just some absolutely spectacular hiking and birding in this area. So again, you can see some more photos of the landscape. I had to include lots of photos because I can never get enough of this beautiful place. And these beautiful birds, of course. And just like the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, Cape St. Mary's has a diversity of breeding seabirds. So while the gannets are, by and far the most common bird there, there are also thousands of common murre and thick-billed murre nesting on the cliffs below, razorbill, black-legged kittiwake, and it is one of the few sites in this part of Newfoundland where you can find great cormorant breeding alongside the much more common double-crested cormorant. But you can see great cormorants nesting there as well. So it is a really neat place for seeing a diversity of seabirds, but not just the seabirds. As I was mentioning, it's one of my favorite landscapes in the province. It's the world's most southern subarctic tundra, and it's a really special ecosystem that's really rare. It only occurs in Newfoundland and just a few locations. And out on this wide open tundra, there's a real diversity of beautiful wildflowers, some of them locally and regionally rare, that grow out there. There's opportunity to see the world's most southern woodland caribou living on that habitat as well. Birds like horned lark, Savannah sparrow, American pipit breeding on the barrens, willow ptarmigan as well, and lots of other wildlife like red fox and short-tailed weasel. And this butterfly is the short-tailed swallowtail. So if you're a butterfly kind of a person, I find a lot of birders are. This is a pretty special butterfly to see. It's regionally endemic. It only lives in Newfoundland and a very small part of Atlantic Canada. and it lives out on these open headlands like this. So it's a very beautiful butterfly, and always a highlight of my summer visits to this area. But not all of the seabirds that you have a chance to see in Newfoundland actually breed here. So later in the summer, in July and into early August, we have a lot of visiting seabirds from other places. Um, Things like the shearwaters, which locally we call hagdowns, box, or skirwinks, depending on which species it is and what part of the island you're from. Um, and they come from far away to enjoy our ocean delicacies. So much like the whales, these birds actually breed far south of us. The great shearwaters and the sooty shearwaters, they breed in the southern hemisphere during our winter. And then our summer is their winter, of course, because it's reversed. They'll head all the way up to Newfoundland to go feeding along our coast on the abundant fish that are in our waters. So it's an awesome opportunity to see some of these birds, sometimes in the thousands. These otherwise pelagic birds that you can see often from land. So we're really lucky in that we often get to see these shearwaters from land, but you can also take boat tours out to see some of these as well. So it's not just the breeding seabirds that we have. There's a whole diversity of these pelagic species that show up throughout the summer season, and are a real highlight for a lot of birders. So we have the shearwaters. We also get yagers, all three species: Pomerine, parasitic, long-tailed occasionally. Great and South Polar skua occur along our coastline. And then later in the season, we get migrating flocks of both red and red-necked phalarope out on the ocean. And that's always pretty fun to get to watch these little tiny shorebirds out on this big wild ocean doing their thing, just spinning around on the water. Um, Really quite a neat thing to experience. This is one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken while I'm out birding. And the question I always ask is, who's photobombing who here? Believe it or not, I was actually trying to photograph the great shearwater that you see there when this humpback whale had the audacity to breach right behind it and photobomb my photo. So it's definitely, these are the kinds of things that happen in Newfoundland all the time. That's I'm one of the reasons that I'm so blessed to live and spend my life exploring here. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the seabirds, but there really are so many other birds to see. It's easy to sort of get lost among the seabirds and get caught up in all the activity with the puffins and all the gannets and all the other breeding seabirds. But we are a big island, a big province with a lot of different habitats to explore, meaning that there are a lot of other birds on offer to see, other birds and other wildlife. Um, so every different habitat, of course, has a whole different suite of birds and other natural highlights to see. So everything from the boreal chickadee that breeds in the boreal forests here and stays all year round to the warblers like black-throated green and mourning warblers, which just come and spend a few short months with us in the summer and then head back to their warmer climes in the south for the winter. Willow ptarmigan that you see here, yellow belly flycatcher, pine grosbeak, more resident species, and even boreal owls, which are always tough to find, but they do live here. So there's a whole bunch of different birds that you can expect to see, or at least go looking for if you decide to come and visit Newfoundland. So again, we have these incredible boreal forests. So all of Newfoundland and Labrador, all of our forests are boreal, but they're also quite diverse. So different parts of the province have very different forest types. They're technically all boreal, but they have different makeups of different tree types. Some are primarily coniferous, others have a lot more deciduous mixed in. So every time you change locations in the province, you get a change in the diversity of the birds that are breeding there. So again, everything from the warblers. There are about 20 species of warbler that breed in our forests. Flycatchers like the olive-sided flycatcher you can see here, spruce grouse, Canada jays, and boreal chickadees that are here year round. You can also see a red crossbill in this photo down here, the second one from the bottom right corner. And our red crossbills are an endemic race to Newfoundland, the Perched race that only occurs on the island of Newfoundland, and they're threatened. So it's always a special thing to see these endemic red crossbills, and who knows, maybe one of these days they'll be split off and become their own species, much like the cassia crossbill was in Idaho a number of years ago. So all kinds of special birds living in our boreal forests and all kinds of great places to explore. So fortunately, we're a big island. with a very small population. So there is a lot of wild, untouched land. Most of it is crown public land that's easy to access and go hiking in. And then there are lots of great parks, national parks, provincial parks, municipal parks that allow great access with hiking trails, walking trails, boardwalks through all kinds of great habitat. So there's lots of wonderful places that you can go and get out into the forest very easily here to go looking for all of these birds. And that's one of the things that we're very blessed with here is access to a lot of wild spaces. We've also got a lot of wetlands. About 40% of the island of Newfoundland is actually wetland. Um, Bogs and fens and lakes and rivers. So we have a lot of water. And when you have a lot of water, you have a great diversity of water birds that live there. So everything that you can, different kinds of waterfowl from ringneck duck and northern pintail. Lots and lots of common loons breeding on our lakes up here. Probably one of the most iconic images of Canada, I guess. And the sound of the loons calling during the summer is one of my favorite parts of that time of year. American bitterns, some breeding shorebirds, including the piping plover, which is endangered in the west coast of the island. So lots and lots of great wetlands. And again, lots of great places that make it easy to access. A lot of our parks sort of focus around wetlands. A lot of towns have built these wonderful walking trails, boardwalks that take you through and over beautiful bogs and ponds and lakes. So lots of great access to go birding and to go exploring, and in a very safe and accessible manner, which is, I think, one of the beautiful things about here. And I mentioned this earlier, but one of my favorite landscapes that we have, and a very rare one, is we have coastal barrens and subarctic and subalpine tundra throughout the island in different places. So we do have the world's most southerly subarctic tundra on the west coast of the island, where in the Long Range Mountains, which are actually an extension of the Appalachians, we do at the tops of those mountains, there are subalpine tundra as well. And there's lots of coastal barrens where the tundra itself actually meets the ocean. And it creates this really special ecosystem called the hyperoceanic barrens, very rare ecosystem in the world. And on that, you can find all kinds of incredibly interesting plants and flowers, some of them quite rare, but also lots of neat birds. So again, things like horned larks and American pipits are breeding through it, all of that. Willow ptarmigan are common throughout Newfoundland in the right habitat. At the tops of the Long Range Mountains and on the south coast of Newfoundland, there are rock ptarmigan breeding. Things like short-eared owls, rough-legged hawks, northern harrier, all kinds of really neat sort of open grassland or tundra type birds breeding there. And some of these, like the willow ptarmigan, it's the most southerly populations of them in the world. So you would normally have to go way up into the high Arctic in order to be able to find these birds, but yet here they are living on our little island out in the middle of the Atlantic. So it's a really, really cool landscape. It's a landscape that I find quite beautiful. I love hiking on it. I love exploring on it. I love getting down on my hands and knees and seeing all these little tiny wildflowers that are growing out amongst the rocks. So it is definitely one of my favorite places to go exploring. And again, there are quite a number of places, especially parks and ecological reserves, that preserve some of this landscape and make it quite accessible to birders. And on our birding tours, we often, we spend a fair bit of time exploring some of these landscapes as well, looking for some of these very special birds, and things like caribou are also sort of a nice little surprise sometimes when you're out birding and you bump into some of the other amazing wildlife that we have here. So besides the birds, there are just so many other treasures to discover. There's lots of great wildlife. We have a very high population of moose on the island. We have woodland caribou, a number of species of marine mammals, seals, bearded seal, harp seal, gray and harbor seals, ring seals. So a really nice little diversity. Lots of amazing wildflowers. If you come here in late June, early July, at the peak of our wildflower season, there's lots and lots of different orchids that you can see. Sometimes just on a 10-day tour across the island, I've recorded as many as 16 species of orchids with some tour groups. So all kinds of little things that people aren't expecting. Lots of berries. Um, in the late summer, especially, is our berry season. There are tons of berries that grow in the wild here. It's a very popular thing for Newfoundlanders to head out and go berry picking. Um, and there are also lots of amazing scenery, beautiful and historic lighthouses, coastal vistas. And here is one of the fossils that you can find at the Mistaken Point Ecological Reserve, about 2 hours south of St. John's. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And these are the oldest animal-like fossils in the world. And there are thousands of fossils on these beautiful flat rocks that just sort of jut out into the sea. So they're globally significant, both because they're the oldest multicellular organisms that have been fossilized in the world, and they're the best examples of any fossils from that age anywhere in the world. And again, it's just 2 hours south of St. John's. It's a beautiful day trip, a wonderful hike out to see some of these fossils. So there's all kinds of neat things besides the birds. And I like to say a lot of people might come here for the birds, but they decide to come back because of everything else they discovered when they're here. But there's, whatever time of year you come, there's always something to see. So we've talked a bit about the sort of the peak tourism season, the June, July, early August. But once late summer hits, the birds start to change a little bit. And one of the big changes that you sort of start to see in late summer, as I'm sure you do in Pennsylvania as well, is when all the shorebirds start to come through. So there's only a handful of shorebirds that actually breed in Newfoundland, but more than 20 species migrate through during the late summer. And at a time when a lot of the other birds are starting to get quiet, the songbirds have gotten very quiet and stopped singing, and they're very secretive. Some of the seabirds are starting to leave their colony. It's wonderful to start seeing these new arrivals starting to pour through. So it adds a lot of excitement to a part of the season that when other things are starting to quiet down. And shorebirding can be quite fantastic here. It can be quite easy to go out and find a mixed flock of 6 or 7 or 8 different species in them, and it is definitely a wonderful time of year to sort of get out. It's usually some of our best weather, and being out on the seacoast or up on the barrens, looking at these shorebirds is a fun part of the latter part of my summer birding here. So again, there's usually more than 20 species. Some of them are quite common, and then we get lots of rare visitors as well, moving through things like buff-breasted sandpipers and things which are a little harder to come by, and add a little bit of spice to a day birding when you're out looking for these all these sandpipers and plovers. And then there's winter, and I will tell you that I think winter is our best kept secret when it comes to birding. Maybe not for our weather, but definitely for birding, it is a fantastic time. Winter brings with it a whole new suite of birds. There's all of these birds that are arriving from up north. These high Arctic breeders that think that Newfoundland is south, and they come and spend their winter with us. So for those people who don't mind the cold, winter birding in Newfoundland and Labrador can be very rewarding. Tour companies like Wings, for example, have been sending tour groups to Newfoundland in January for a long time. It's always a big hit. It's a popular tour. And it's often very popular with the people who are the ABA listers, the people who are really trying to fill out that North American bird list. And there's a lot of things like the dovekey that you can see up here in the top left, that are common birds here. And it's Newfoundland is pretty much the only place you can expect to see dovekey from land relatively easy. So this photo was just taken while I was sitting on the end of a wharf with my feet dangling over the end of the wharf, and the dovekey were just swimming around me. So lots of these northern birds that are pretty tough to see in most of North America. There are quite a few that are fairly easy to see here, and that's why quite a few birders actually do come during our winter months. Things like Bohemian waxwing, purple sandpiper, of course, snowy owl. And down in the bottom left corner, you can see a tufted duck. So as a lot of you folks would know, it's a European species. That in pretty much any part of North America would be a very rare bird, and people would jump in their cars and race out to see it. Well, we get a wintering flock of about 70 here in St. John's that come presumably from Iceland every winter. They disappear during the summer months to go off breed, in Iceland or Greenland, and then they come and actually winter here. And St. John's has the only wintering population of tufted ducks in North America. So there are all kinds of these really cool species that you can see with relative ease in winter. And a lot of times, because, especially with the waterfowl, because all of our fresh water freezes up, they're just little sections of open water. You actually get quite close to a lot of these birds. So it's a really quality time spent viewing these birds as well. So I do think that winter is one of our best kept secrets. We're sort of letting you in on the secret a little bit here. Um, so as I said, it's not for everybody, but if you are somebody who likes to explore colder winter climates, then this is a wonderful place to think about coming to visit for some birding in January or February. Things like boreal owl are always possibility. Dovekies are pretty common in January. Blackback woodpeckers, as I mentioned, tufted ducks, winter finches. The white-winged crossbills, red crossbill, evening grosbeak, pine grosbeak. Are often quite common during the winter. And you can also see here a picture of a field fair. So as I'm going to mention in a couple of minutes, Newfoundland is also somewhere that gets quite a bit we get a lot of European rarities here because of our location. And sometimes we get things like redwing or field fair or some of these rare European species showing up in the winter and also in the spring. So that always adds a little bit of spice to a birding trip to come up and see some of these ABA rarities. If you do think about coming to Newfoundland for a visit, there are lots of things to consider when you're planning your trip. It really is a fantastic birding destination at any time of year. Whatever time you wanted to come, there's always something to see. But that's not to say that the birds you want to see are always here. So you really do need to think about which season speaks to you, what birds it is that you want to see. And it's also not just the birds. You have to consider things like whales or icebergs, or what are some of the other things that you want to experience while you're here? Is it some of the history and the culture? Well, some of the more touristy things like aren't necessarily open in the winter, and you're more likely to be able to experience some of those in the summer as well. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're planning a trip to Newfoundland and picking the right window to come to really enjoy what it is that you're looking to see. So a few little tips for if you are planning a visit to Newfoundland and Labrador. The first one is one that I sort of think I mentioned now at the very onset when we started this talk, is that it's much bigger than most people expect. The island itself is a large island. For me to drive from St. John's to the northern tip, it's 700 miles. It's 11 hours of straight driving. So it's a big island. So I usually suggest that you have at least 2 weeks if you want to explore most of the island, and even then you're just sort of hitting the main sites across the island. If you have less time for a visit, then I suggest narrowing your visit to one general area. So, for example, just do the eastern part of the island, or just do the western part of the island. And deciding on which area you want to visit depends partly on what you'd want to see. So, for example, the eastern half of Newfoundland, the Avalon Peninsula, the St. John's area, that's where all the major seabird colonies are. So if you really want to see the puffins and experience the seabird colonies, you want to focus your visit on the eastern half of the island. Whereas western Newfoundland has a greater songbird diversity, and it also has some spectacular scenery in places like Grossmore National Park. So you really put a bit of thought into what it is that you would want to see. When to visit? Well, as I've mentioned, Newfoundland and Labrador, it's a beautiful place at any time of year. There's always something fun to see. So choosing your own dates might depend on what it is that you're hoping to see. So a couple of little timelines to help you out. The seabird colonies are most active from late May to early August. Once the first week of August hits, some of the species start to leave the colony. So some will hang on, like puffins will hang on until late September, but the murres and the kittiwakes and the razorbill all start leaving earlier. So if you really want to get the full experience of the seabird colonies, I suggest June or July. The breeding songbirds are most diverse and active from early June to early July. They're still here in July and August, but as I'm sure is the case in your neck of the woods as well, they get really quiet. They're very busy feeding young. They've stopped singing, so they're here, but they're a lot harder to find. So if you really want to experience the songbirds as well in the boreal forests, you want to sort of focus your time from June to early July. And coming later in July, you're going to find it harder to find and see the songbirds. However, the whales are most numerous and reliable in July and early August. So if whale watching is something that you really want to do, you might want to look at that time in early July when both the whales and the birds are kind of at their peak. Icebergs, which do vary a lot from year to year. Some years we get a bunch of icebergs. Some years we get hardly any, and you can't really predict very far in advance what the next year is going to be like. But if you are somebody who'd be hoping to see icebergs when you come, they're most reliable in May and June. So you want to come in the earlier part of the late spring, very early summer if you want to have the best chance of seeing icebergs. But then maybe you're interested in other things like shorebird migration. That's later in the summer, wildflower season. There are wildflowers right through the whole summer, but the sort of the peak is the end of June, and the first half of July would be sort of peak wildflower blooming season. And winter birding is fantastic. Again, if you ever think about exploring a cold wintry place in January or February, we're a great place to come. The birding is great. The lots of great. They're short days, so we do some great birding during the day, and then we usually have lots of time in the evenings to go out and explore some of the restaurants in St. John's and get to relax, and it's pretty leisurely, which is kind of nice. And one of my biggest tips, if you're planning to come to Newfoundland, is to really plan ahead. Accommodations, especially outside St. John's and some of the smaller communities, and rental cars. That's usually the biggest issue. They often book up months in advance. So if you're planning a trip to Newfoundland, I often say the very first thing you want to do is book your rental car if you're going to need one. Because if you wait until just a few weeks before you arrive, you'll often find that there are no cars available, and it really throws a monkey wrench into some people's plans. So definitely plan ahead and book some of those things, especially your accommodations and your rental cars really early. And then think about some of the other things that you want to do and see besides the birding. There's so many other things to explore, whether it's culturally or musically or food. There's so many great restaurants and food opportunities here now as well. Microbreweries, like everywhere now, the craft brew industry has really taken off here. So there's lots of opportunity for food and drink and music and hiking and culture and history. There's just so many opportunities to do some of those things. So definitely think about some of those things and what else you'd like to sort of incorporate into a visit. I do want to talk a little bit about Labrador. I know I've been focusing mostly on the island in this talk. And Labrador is a very special place. It is absolutely beautiful. I've been fortunate to get up there a couple of times, mostly in southern Labrador. But I also have visited northern Labrador in the Torngat Mountains National Park, which I think is one of the most stunning places in North America. But it's not easy to get to. A lot of Labrador is difficult to get to, if not outright inaccessible. So if you want to sort of include a visit to Labrador as part of your visit to the province, you do have a few extra things to sort of think about and some extra planning to do. Bird-wise, there are a number of birds that breed in Labrador that don't breed on the island. A number of things like orange-crowned warblers breed up there, and white-crowned sparrows. Further north, you get into breeding Lapland longspurs and snow buntings, and even northern wheatear breeds in parts of Labrador. So there are some really cool birding opportunities, but the further north you go, the harder those are to access. So you really do have to do some planning about getting into places like Torngat Mountains National Park, which you can see on the photo here on the right. That's a part of the Torngat Mountains National Park. Absolutely spectacular place. So Labrador is beautiful and very exciting and well worth a visit, but it does require a little more planning. Southeastern Labrador, so Fort Howe to Cartwright, for example, that area, Red Bay, which is absolutely gorgeous and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They're accessible from Newfoundland by ferry. So if you're planning a trip across the island, you can include a short trip. It's only about an hour and a half on the ferry to get over to Labrador, and you can explore sort of southeastern Labrador fairly easily for just a couple of days, and include that as just a short extension on a visit to the island. There is the Trans Labrador Highway, which was completed a number of years ago. which does go from Fort Howe in the very southeastern corner all the way to Cartwright and Happy Valley Goose Bay. So it's 600 kilometers. That's about, what, 450 miles. But it does have some pretty isolated sections, so you need to be prepared for some long drives, without anywhere to stop along the way. And Torngat Mountains National Park, as I mentioned, there are two national parks, the Mealy Mountains National Park and Torngat Mountains National Park in Labrador. Both are absolutely gorgeous and stunning. But Torngat Mountains National Park, especially, is accessible only by air, and it requires some special planning. You have to organize with outfitters to get flown into the base camp and spend those kinds of times. So opportunities, it's an absolutely beautiful place, but it does take a little bit of extra work to get there, and sometimes the best places do, right? And just to go back to that, all of these things about visiting Newfoundland and Labrador, you're going to find my email and my website at the end of this talk. I'm always happy to chat with folks if you want to sort of pick my brain about planning a trip here and some of these considerations, and how do I plan to do this. I'm always happy to sort of chat with folks and help you come up with a game plan for visiting our beautiful province. It is worth the effort, I will tell you that. And I also want to talk, you can't talk birds in Newfoundland without talking a little bit about some of our rare visitors from across the pond from Europe. Because where we are located on the very edge of North America, we get some rare but sometimes regular visitors from Europe. So things like I talked about, like tufted duck and Eurasian widgeon, are regular wintering species here. And then we get much rarer visitors, things like Eurasian oyster catcher that you see up here. I think there are now 6 records of Eurasian oyster catcher for Newfoundland. There are only 7 for all of North America. And the one other record was found in the Pribilofs off of Alaska, and it was found by a Newfoundlander, believe it or not. So we get some of these really rare visitors from Europe. Northern lapwings used to be a fairly regular visitor. Haven't been so many in recent years. All of North America's records of common redshank, which you see in the bottom here, are from here. Black-tailed godwit is a fairly regular spring visitor. We get one every other spring, sometimes a bunch of them. European golden plover arrives here pretty much every spring as well. Some years we get big numbers of them. Some years it's just a few. So there are all these really cool European species that sort of just get blown off course, usually when they're migrating between Ireland and Iceland, for example. It happens in the spring a lot, but sometimes in the fall as well, with different species tending to show up more in one or the other. So we get these really sort of rare birds that, some of the big listers from the United States and across Canada sort of fly to Newfoundland at the drop of a hat to chase some of these big rarities. And sometimes they hang around and are a lot of fun to see as a visiting birder or a local birder. It's just some more photos of some of these rare European species. Here we have black-tailed godwit, Eurasian oyster catcher, fieldfare, gray heron. We've got a number of records of gray heron now for the island. Slatyback gull, European golden plover, and chaffinch. So there's all these really neat European species that show up here, and that's probably one of the most exciting things as a local birder here in Newfoundland, is to be looking for these rare ABA rare type birds. All right, I want to say thank you again for inviting me to chat. I am so happy to have been able to chat with you guys. Here you will see my website that Lois mentioned earlier. It's www.birdtherock.com. But you can also check out my various adventures, both here in Newfoundland and as I travel to other parts of the world leading tours, on my Facebook page, on Twitter, if anybody still uses that, or X, I guess they call it now. I don't really use that much anymore. But Instagram, I use Instagram a lot. Post a lot of photos, both from here and from my travels. And you can use the hashtags at the bottom there, Bird the Rock, BirdsNL, to find me. So I'm going to leave that up in case anybody wants to write any of that down, and I will let you guys take back over. I don't know how you want to deal with questions, but I'm happy to stay and answer as many questions as anybody might have.